What's up, everyone, and welcome back. You are watching Well-Rounded Individual. I'm your host, Adam Schindler, and I have a real surprise and a treat for you today. Today is a first for Well-Rounded Individual. We have a return guest, and we have this return guest because not only does she do amazing things, and she actually has had quite an adventure lately, but she's been the most requested return guest. And when I had her the first time, so many of you guys really liked what she had to say. You really liked where she came from, her perspective, and just, all the value that she brought, that you would DM me and ask for her specifically. You should have her on again. So your wishes have been granted. And once again, we have Miss Lorraine Lindsey. Welcome back.
Well, I'm so honored. That is such a really sweet welcome back. I mean, people are requesting me back. I'm very honored for that. So thank you for having me back. I will come back anytime you like.
Thank you. I'd love to have you. And I'd have you on every week.
Yeah, well, we can do a co-star type thing,
Yeah, that's awesome. So, yeah, like I was saying, I think you were my second guest.
Was I?
This is, way back in July. We did our first podcast, so almost 6 months ago.
Gosh, wow, time flies.
Yeah, so we've got a lot to talk about over the last 6 months because you've been on quite the adventure lately. But yeah, when you came on and you through YouTube, through all the platforms, TikTok, Instagram, everything like that, I had so many people message me about how much they liked you.
Wow.
And said you should have her back on again. And I knew that I was going to. So I'm glad that we got to do it.
Well, good. It took some convincing, though, Adam. I don't know. Just kidding.
Yeah, no. So I texted you this weekend, actually.
Yep.
And because I didn't know that you had still been gone because you've been, traveling. And
Quite a bit.
I sent you a text and it didn't deliver at first. And I was like, that's interesting.
She blocked me for not having me back on the show.
Yeah, and so then you landed and you said, I just landed. And I was like, oh, no, I thought you'd been back, but...
I did. I came back and then I left again, so...
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
so your timing was perfect, actually.
Well, things that work out for a reason.
That's exactly right.
Cool. So let's talk about it.
Okay.
You just finished first a month-long solo trip
Yes.
to Spain.
Yes.
That's incredible.
It was very incredible. It was a lot of different things emotionally, but yes, incredible would be one word to describe it.
Tell me about it. What prompted it? Why Spain? You speak Spanish?
No, I don't. I look like I do, but no, I don't.
I bet they
Everyone thinks I'm like Latina, which it's very flattering, but no, but I don't. But I am trying to learn because I do love the language. I think it's beautiful language. And, there's different dialects to the language.
Right.
But yeah, I love Spanish. I definitely want to learn. I know some Italian.
Madrid?
No, I was in a place called Costa Brava, and the city specifically was Del Mar, something like that. But it's Costa Brava. It's just north of Spain, about 45 minutes from Spain. A little kind of beach town, if you will.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I needed to be by the water. That was very important on this journey.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's part of what just was important to you because of does the ocean have something like some power to it?
For me, I've always been someone who needs her battery recharge, right? So a lot of people, because I do podcasts and I speak and I was always in career that had me very social. So the impression of me is that I'm a very extroverted person. Whereas in reality, I'm kind of a little bit of a combination of both because I prefer to be introverted. I prefer to be by myself because when I'm around a lot of people, although I love engaging with people, it's very draining for me. And so because I was very intentional about why I was leaving for so long, I needed to be in a place where there was nature, specifically the ocean or some body of water, because for some reason, water just really, it grounds me quite a bit.
I like that.
Yeah.
So was it the Mediterranean?
It is the Mediterranean, yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
Okay, so let's
tap into why.
Yeah, tap into what was the purpose and why? And what was the purpose and what was your goal
Okay, so a few things. Number one, I always, from the time I was much younger, I mean, became a mother. Think I shared this with you on the last show. Is I was a mother at a very young age. I had my kid when I was 17 years old, and I just remember there was a time in my life where I was incredibly overwhelmed by life and really feeling like I needed to just unplug for a while, just escape. But being a mom, single mother, I just didn't have, number one, I never wanted to leave my son for an extended period of time. And number two, financially, I just could not afford to do something like that. But it was always something that I had this desire to do. Like one day I'm going to have this eat, pray, love life, right? Where I just go on this sabbatical and just figure things out independent of all of the noise. Years later, and I mean many years later, I mean my son's 27 years old now, life was chaotic in a way, and mostly because of the noise in my mind. I had a lot of different things going on. There were things in my personal life, my relationship of 10 years. There was also me quitting a big corporate career and walking away from the getting out of jail from the golden handcuffs where I was making a ton of money, and I had a very specific title that was sexy, and I was traveling and doing all of the, luxurious life through that job. I was just, I'm in my 40s now. So there was a lot of different things emotionally, spiritually, financially, all of those things that it's like, I need to do this again. I need to unplug because I felt as though you have your life and your life becomes somehow your identity, becomes your identity construct. You kind of get consumed by all of these things and titles and things that you need to be. And I said, I feel like I've kind of lost myself. And to the outside world, everything was seemingly successful. People look at me like, oh, she's got it all together. She's got it all. But there was a part of me that was like, why am I so unfulfilled? Why am I questioning so many things? I was overwhelmed. I had compassion fatigue in work and in my relationship. And I said, I don't know who she is anymore. And maybe that's a good thing. And financially, I was able to take a leap of faith and just bounce, just leave.
Yeah.
And I don't have the responsibilities I used to have. My son's an adult. He's doing very well. I just felt like I can just go. And it was very exciting for me in the beginning, the idea, thinking, well, where am I going to go? Because I've been blessed enough to travel the world and do different things. So I'm like, where would I want to go that feels safe for a woman to travel by herself? And I didn't want to stay in the United States because it would be too easy for me to socialize. So I kind of wanted to put myself in an environment that was very vulnerable for me and that I didn't have the ability to communicate as easily. So that's my long-winded kind of answer how I got into this.
Yeah, that's awesome. Spain, it's never too late either, right? So
No,
like,
of
I
course
love
not.
that you prefaced it with like, you've always wanted this, but like you couldn't because of, responsibilities, motherhood, not being able to financially. And because I think a lot of people can probably relate to that. Like how, like what you just did, a month in Spain of exploring, learning interiorly and exteriorly of your environment is something that I think all like wanderers and dreamers really just like, it's like the pinnacle of like, what would you want to do?
I know I've heard so many people say, wow, Lorraine, I so want to do that because I shared the journey on my social media.
Right.
Initially, I wasn't going to. I was just going to completely unplug. And then I said, you know what? First of all, before I go, I can't just go to go. This is not a vacation. I need to really get clear on my intentions on why I'm going and what it is that I want to get out of this experience. And again, I knew that at this time in my life, and I think that life, when you set an intention for something, so years ago when I was 17, 18, 19 years old, I had this idea, but it was embedded in me. That idea to one day just unplug was embedded in me. It took that long for that to manifest itself. And looking back, this could not have been the better time in my life to do this because of who I am, what I've experienced up to this point, and how much more clear I am of who I am as a person, but also clear that I needed to reconnect.
Right.
And so I said, okay, I'm going to go, but I'm going to be very, very intentional about why I'm going, what I want to get out of this. And so what I did is probably a couple weeks before leaving, I started journaling and writing and saying, okay, this is a 30-day journey. Number one, I need to know what my core values are, because when I talk to people, when I coach people, people don't know what their core values are for their life. It's not something they think about. Number two was, what are the principles? What are the rules for my life with those core values? Because I had completely lost touch. And also, whatever I think my core values are they actually truly that, or has that changed as my life has evolved? Mm-hmm. And so I thought about those and I said, okay, I'm going to be very clear about that. And I'm going to create questions that I want to ask myself. And it's going to be a question today or per day, and each week, the questions and the intention of the questions will get a little bit deeper, a little bit more profound for me to really unearth some things. Mm-hmm. And I knew that I was going to be very uncomfortable with self. I knew that I was going to be uncomfortable with discovering some truths that I didn't want to face. But I also knew that I needed to make some very hard decisions for my life when I returned. Mm-hmm. And so I said, I've got to go to a place, again, where I can be vulnerable, where I can be somewhat uninhibited, but also where I can't easily communicate with other people and socialize. Mm-hmm. So although I was in this beautiful place, I wasn't sightseeing and doing the tour. I literally was somewhat of a recluse. Mm-hmm. I got up, I was intentional about my day, I did my breathing, my meditation, and I started really documenting everything. Mm-hmm. Because I said, if I can crack this code, if I can really figure out what's going on with me, why there's such a disconnect, why is it that I consciously think this, but there's some disconnect with my subconscious, so things in my life that I want to move is not moving, why is that happening to me? And I said, if I can crack this and journal it and document it, then I can create some type of coaching or something to help other people as well. So I was very intentional about going this time.
Yeah, I'm glad that you documented it. I think that's a good thing. Like it's a nice idea to think like, oh, I want to completely disconnect, but I feel like there's more value in having a balance of that, because the fact that you did document it, not only because you can tell people about it all day long, but if they get to see how it was, it's going to help them so much more, and to be able to dive in and really understand how they could possibly replicate something similar.
Right, right.
Do you feel like, because you ask yourself a different question every day, correct? Did you have all of these questions written down before you left? Did you know?
Yes. So what I did is I used AI, I used ChatGPT, okay? And I went onto it and I said, here's what I'm going through. I was very specific. I kind of almost journaled to it, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I said, evaluate my conversation as though you were a therapist, you're checking behavioral science, neuroscience, pseudoscience, all of the things, and help me to create these questions. And here's what my goal is, what I want to get out of this. But I want you to create 30 questions for me that will challenge me, that will force me to dig deep, that will be uncomfortable at times. But this is something important. Another thing that I thought about, because as I'm writing and it generated these questions, I would read the questions and now let me tweak it and let me change it and this and that. And then I kept going kind of back and forth, because I didn't want it to be an AI generated thing. I wanted it to be very personal, but I needed it to kind of come up with these 30 questions. And then when I finally felt like I tweaked it enough, I then let it populate the questions, but I did not want to know what the questions were.
Okay.
Because I wanted whatever came to me as an answer to be organic. Okay. And this is why I said to myself, what would be a good time frame? And I don't remember if it was a book or a podcast. I read a lot on human behavior and stuff, but there was something that said, if you can sit with yourself for 30 minutes, you'll get the normal chatter that pops up, but other things will start to come up after a while. And so I always use that as a practice for myself. So this is why I set the 30-minute clock. So what I would do every morning is I'd get myself into a state of mind where I was a little bit more relaxed. I would try different methodologies to see which one was most comfortable for me. Um, and then I would reveal the question.
Okay.
And I would ponder the question. I would just sit literally in silence for 30 minutes. And it was crazy, just the things that would pop up in my head, all kinds of things. And then I would start writing. And when I was writing, things were flowing, things were coming up, emotions, things that I had completely forgotten about in my life. And as the time went on, things started connecting. And I was like, oh my God, this is why. Oh my gosh, that's why. It was like there was a part of me that was lost that I was reconnecting to. It was like my inner child was hanging out with me. And it was very profound.
Yeah.
And it was very emotional and at times very, very difficult, if I'm being honest.
That you kind of answered some of the questions, the follow-up questions that I had. Like I was thinking, like I was going to ask, like, was there any time like throughout the journey where you were like, oh, like, I want to adjust these questions as we go because like I feel differently now. But because you didn't know what was coming next,
Right.
that kind of throws that out the window. But how did you keep it a secret from yourself? Like what kind of like process did you use to where like you were like you didn't know?
The questions, you
Yeah.
mean? Well, I mean, after, like I said, I did all the tweaking and then it populated 30 questions. I said, okay, this is it. I'm not even going to look.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And so then I just copy pasted it and literally I put it on like on paper and I would just look at one question at a time. And I was just very intentional about that. And I did not want who she was going into the journey to construct the outcome.
Right.
It needed to be, I really needed it to be very organic because I felt like I had lost her. I needed a reconnection. I needed to rediscover. I needed to love myself. And I didn't realize how much I wasn't. I didn't realize how much things I was doing based on what I thought I should be doing. I didn't understand that what I wanted is not always what I need. And I started getting a lot of clarity. Another thing that helped me, especially there were times where some of the questions were really, I mean, I was digging and stuff was coming up. So what I did also to add to the journey was I had to do one act of kindness every day. That was the rule. Big or small, there was one act of kindness, even if that act of kindness was for myself.
Okay.
Another thing was to find one thing that I can celebrate, a victory, a win. And so for me, literal things, like something so silly as the first few days I got there, I didn't really know my surroundings. I was really kind of anxious and I was very nervous. And I was like, why did I come here? I don't know anybody. I don't know any faces. I don't even know how to call 911 if I needed help. Am I really? All these questions. And so I would go to restaurants every day. And I said, no, after day 3, your win is going to be to find a grocery store. And you're going to walk into a foreign grocery store and you're going to shop like you're at home. And when I did that, walking to the grocery store, because I have no vehicle, no car, I walked to that grocery store. And when I bought groceries, I was so proud of myself. And I said, you know what, this is crazy, but me just celebrating that little bit of a win, it just set me on fire. It made me feel good, as silly as that was. And I started documenting, okay, this is important. Celebrating wins are important. Make sure when you get home, you incorporate that when you start to, when you create your programs and stuff. So,
yeah, I think that literally listening to that just kind of like lit a light bulb off in my head. That's something that like I am horrible at.
What, celebrating your
celebrating wins, like little wins. And when I consciously like think about, oh, like this was a win, right? Like those things like build a foundation of like positivity and just in confidence, right? Because for me, the way I am, like I'm like, oh, if it's not like if I'm not hitting home runs, then it doesn't matter,
Right.
Right. So that's so important for me in particular, but I think probably a lot of people listening is just to like to give yourself credit and celebrate little things so that you can achieve bigger things.
Absolutely. Well, it's a compounding effect, and a lot of books are written about like the power of habit or the atomic habit or things like that. And so I always knew that, first of all, recognizing patterns and then interrupting patterns is a big part of changing yourself, if you will. But also, too, I'm a grandiose thinker. I always think in large scaled things. So when I think about life and where I should be and what I should be doing in my life, I have the habit of being very grandiose in that. And what happens so often for me is that if I'm not getting to the target fast enough, if I'm not getting what I think I should have, I start to feel very defeated and almost completely deflate. And I realized, how counterproductive that actually was for me. Like, it's great to have these big visions for your life, of course, and these big goals, but also, why do you need that? What is the reason for that goal? And be very honest with yourself about that. It's like, what is it that my ego needs to get out of this thing, to gain this thing? Because really, when you measure that and you really are honest with yourself, when it becomes selfless instead of selfish, the small wins actually matter more. They're just beautiful stepping stones. It's like you're paving a brick by brick to get to that place, And then I feel like also when you celebrate the wins in a direction, you start to trust the process a little bit better. You surrender to the process a little bit better, and you're not so obsessed measuring outcome. Because what I do realize now is that expectation of outcome will be your greatest defeat. You can intentionally be a phenomenal person every day by doing little things.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be this grandiose thing that everybody else is impressed by.
Right.
And
you know what's wild about that is that you can be that same amazing person that does great little things every day. And if you expect an outcome that doesn't happen, you don't feel like you're worth anything.
Well, if you create this big thing that you need to do,
right,
and you start to go towards it, you're so focused on that you don't realize your victories. And sometimes when you get to that big thing, this is another side of it, is you hit the mark and then you're not satisfied, or you're now think you have to get something else. And so it's like a void. Sometimes the big shiny object that we're after is just to fill a void. It's to try to feel like we're enough. When I had the opportunity to go to Kansas City to speak to the Kansas City Chiefs, they hired me to come there and speak. One of the things that we talked about, we discussed was, they've hit their summit. The mountain that they were climbing to hit its peak was to make it to the NFL as athletes. But then you see when they get there, they some of them are self-sabotaging. They blow all their money. And it was like, well, why is this happening? Why does this happen to them? And I started doing some research, and it's like, well, if the goal is that, and that goal, when you meet it, is to make everybody say, yes, I'm enough. I'm trying to fulfill that. When you get there, it still won't be enough, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas
it's just what's the next thing to prove that I am still enough? Correct.
And it's like the silly description that I gave, the analogy that I used was a seed, And I said to the gentleman, I had this little seed, and I said, this is an apple seed. And there's a quote, and it says, I can't remember the quote now. But anyways, there's this, the seed, the greatest potential of the seed is not just to become a tree, not just to be a tree that bears fruit, but it has the potential to be an orchard. That's great potential. But it all depends on how the seed is planted, whether it'll ever meet that potential. And I think that in their mind, they're just looking to be the tree that bears fruit. And if everybody eats the fruit and nobody plants the rest of the seeds that come of that fruit, then it stops there. The tree will die.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I don't know if I'm making sense right now because I'm rambling, but
no, I get it.
Yeah.
I have a question though. Do you find that like high achievers and I think this, right? High achievers, coaches in particular, like a lot of times, like I really encourage everyone that I work with to celebrate literally everything that they do.
Okay.
but I have a really hard time doing it myself.
Interesting.
And people who have like achieved high things and been champions and things of that nature, and maybe not everyone, but do you find that it's more common in that type of like high achiever to continue to like not give themselves the credit that they deserve?
So
Or do you feel like maybe like, because sometimes I feel like I'm like, yeah, I know that I'm achieving great things, but if I act like it, people will think that like I'm full of myself or something.
Right. Well, why do you concern yourself with the people that think that versus the ones who don't?
See, that's
Yeah.
actually a really good point.
Yeah. Because there's always everybody in the room, right? It's just what we focus on. And I've learned through my experience with coaching people, especially because I'm a high achiever. And so I tend to draw a lot of high achievers into my coaching. But there's usually two types that I find. So there's a high achiever that's getting ready to get ready. They've got an idea after an idea after an idea, and they're doing everything, and they are what a jack of all trades, master of none. I've got those type of high achievers. They will start, they don't finish anything, right? They get overwhelmed. They start to procrastinate. They know they have that big grandiose vision, but the work that it takes, they just don't believe in themselves enough, right? That's that subconscious, conscious disconnect. The other high achiever gets incredibly laser focused on one specific thing, and they're very good at that one thing, and everything else kind of falls below the waistline. So their relationships suffer, or their personal closeness to other people, or their family, or their self-esteem sometimes. But they can be incredibly distracted by that one thing that they're very, very, very good at. But that usually those type of high achievers don't think they're good at anything else. They have a limiting belief that this is the only thing that I'm good at.
This is where my value
And if I
comes from.
stop doing this thing, like those athletes I talked about, you know, one of the questions I would say to them is like, you're a high achiever, right? You're a high achiever. You have the discipline, the focus, all of that to become the top athlete. I mean, you have literally gotten where there's such a small percentage to hit there. But your belief system is that's the only thing you're good at. So when it comes to getting all this money, you don't think you're a good business person. You don't think you're a good investor. You don't think you're smart. All you think you are is an athlete. But that's not true. If you applied those skill sets into other things in your life, you would just be as equally profitable in whatever that means when I say the word profit. So that's what I notice with high achievers. They're either all over the place with a lot of things, or they're really good at this one specific thing, or maybe two specific things, and everything else kind of like falls off. But again, it's limiting belief. Very rare do I find somebody, and even when I worked in the casino business and I was dealing with people who were incredibly successful, millionaires and billionaires, and they were very unfulfilled. They were very unhappy people. Right. So I always wondered, why is success still a miserable feat? But again, it's like that conscious versus that subconscious, and that disconnect of, if I get this thing, this is who I will be to others.
It seems like there's a common theme of just always like searching for something outside of you. That's leaving you unfulfilled.
Well, the one thing that everybody's searching for is love and connection. It's what it all boils down to. Like, I wouldn't want wealth and a ton of money if I didn't think it was going to make people like me.
Yeah.
I wouldn't care, right? If I just had money to have money and live in alone, it didn't matter if people were impressed by it. Why would I do it? We're all doing it for the same reason, no matter what it is, whether we want to physically look great, whether we want to look young and youthful as a woman or fit as a man, whether it's being incredibly intelligent, or whether it's a career that's impressive, or just having a crap ton of wealth. At the end of the day, we all want it to connect and for people to love and connect to us.
Right.
We want to be liked. We want to feel valid. We do it for validation.
Dang.
Yeah. The Monk or the Man. I think there's a book about that.
Man, my brain has just gone a full
and see, there's nothing
journey
wrong with it.
Conversation.
Really? Well, I
Yeah.
don't think there's anything wrong with it. And I think when people say death to the ego and all that, and I love the methodology and the ideas behind it, but I think our ego serves us
Yeah, no, absolutely.
as well. But we just have to be more connected to self.
Right.
and more aware as to why.
Like fire, right? Like fire can cook food and feed a family, but it also can
Burn a
burn down
house
a
down.
house.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I think too, because I've read some books on ego,
Hmm.
and ego is the enemy, right? I don't necessarily think that it's always the enemy.
Right.
I think that you can use it for good, because without ego, why would anyone pursue anything?
Yes, and yeah, maybe, perhaps. But without love, why would anybody pursue anything? Right?
Mm,
It's just that sometimes the things that we think are love are really rooted in our fear.
mm,
And so it's not really love. And what I've learned in my experience, and this is just my personal opinion, is that love really is more so an abundant source.
mm,
You know, I don't have to be with a human being that I feel our time has come where the relationship needs to go its separate ways, and because I'm doing that mean I can't love them anymore. I can
yeah.
love you enough to leave you. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Um Also too, just like thinking again, circling back to the journey that I was on, it's like, you know, why am I here? At some point I was like, well, why am I here? Why am I doing this?
Hmm.
You know, and it's like, well, am I trying to have self-mastery? And it's like, well, no. I mean, the closest thing you'll ever get to self-mastery is self-awareness.
Mm,
And then you just make decisions off of that, you know, like, okay, well, why am I doing this? Why am I doing that? How is that serving me? How is it not serving me?
mm,
Who am I at this point in my life that these are my choices that I'm making?
mm,
And really realizing that I'm here at this very point in my life because circumstances have happened to me.
mm,
And not only have they happened, but I have decided what meaning I'm going to attach to those
mm,
circumstances. And I feel like in this journey of my life so far that that's become the most powerful thing that I've learned is what is the meaning that I'm attaching to everything that I'm
mm,
doing or to the people in my lives. And if the meaning is not good and it's making me feel unhappy in some capacity, I'm choosing that. And why? What is the validation that I'm needing here that I keep beating my head up against this wall, so to speak, whether it's a career or a relationship? And why did I decide and at what point that I needed to lie to myself to make this fit?
mm,
And I think that my biggest takeaway at the end of all of it was stop lying to yourself, girlfriend.
mm.
Like get real with yourself
Right.
and don't punish yourself because this is your truth.
What do you think the reasoning behind like the self lying was? Like, did you even were you conscious that you were lying to yourself, or was it
At
like
times,
you were lying to yourself like because you wanted an outcome that telling the truth to
or I was
yourself
just
wouldn't?
afraid.
Mm,
You know, there were times where I feel like we always know inside, right? There's like times when you believe something and then there's other times when you know something.
mm,
And that's something I may have read or heard or what have you, or concluded myself. There's so much information in my head these days. I don't know where it's all coming from. But I think that more than the latter is that a lot of decisions we make is because we're afraid.
mm,
And so as an example, relationship, like I was in a relationship for 10 years. The relationship was tumultuous at times. It was on again, off again at different times. There were times when it was, you know, toxic.
mm,
And then it got to a time where it finally had just calmed down enough. And after a decade of all of it, there was this moment of just like, why am I here?
mm,
why am I doing this? And it's like, oh, because I'm afraid. And I translated being fearful of the unknown, of getting older, of like who's going to love me, all of those
mm,
things, to rationalizing it somehow in my mind
mm,
and deciding for my life, like I made a decision that this is as good as it's going to get. And I'm like, and why did I decide that? What
right.
a lie I told myself. And I became very convinced of the lie.
Yeah. What? How did you break out of that? Like, so from the you that was convinced that that's as good as it's going to get for
Hmm.
you, to the you that decided that that wasn't going to be the end road. Like
Mm-hmm.
you wanted more, you wanted different, you wanted better for you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how'd that realization come to pass?
I had to make a commitment to myself, not to everybody else. And no matter how selfish it looked, my responsibility was to start loving me first.
Mm.
And being honest with things that did not feel right and discern whether or not that was accurate for me.
Mm.
And it makes me kind of emotional to think about, because in that 30-day journey, the biggest realization that I had was that, damn, Lorraine, you have not been loving you. And you're convinced that you love all these other people, that you're sacrificing yourself for them. But how could you even say that you love them so great if you're incapable of loving yourself? And so I said, I have got to scale all the way back and get become kind to me.
Mm.
To really say, well, before you do this thing, whatever decision you're getting ready to make, will it hurt you? Number one. Will it hurt them? Number two. And who will come first in that decision? You know? And it was hard. But what I realized was, by making the decision, it was a win. It was me celebrating a win.
Mm-hmm.
It was me saying, okay, that's how you pour into yourself. That's how you love yourself. You make decisions that you know that are right. And yes, maybe someone will be hurt because you left them. Or maybe those friendships will be hurt because you cut them off. I don't need to be mean about it. I don't need to be unkind about it. I don't need to be like, you're out, that kind of thing. But I'm like, maybe they'll understand, maybe they won't. But if they are experiencing what I'm experiencing, truly, truly, they'll know it's the right decision for both of us.
Yeah, and I feel like in that type of situation as well, like, it doesn't help either party
Mm-hmm.
to continue to live in a state that is pretend.
Right.
You know?
And that's hard to do when it doesn't always feel like pretend. Right? Because listen, every toxic relationship, every bad relationship, people are not staying in it because it's 24/7 that way.
Right. Yeah.
You know, there's
Yeah,
extreme
exactly.
highs and extreme lows, and there's familiar patterns. You know, a lot of people who get into very unhealthy relationships are in those relationships because emotionally it feels familiar.
Mm.
You know, I grew up in toxicity, and at the same time too, I grew up with love, and it just varied from day to day. And me not understanding how the brain, like from a neuroscience perspective, it was synapsing and firing off certain hormones that would make me feel a certain kind of way. And I started studying even neuroscience and things like that. And I'm really understanding, okay, there's not just me thinking this and it's spiritual. There is literal science to what's happening.
Mm.
And really, like, how do I rewire? How do I, when I can work out in the gym and change the look of my body. Well, there's neuroplasticity in that brain. And if you work that thing out, you'll change the way you look at life. And when you do, you make very different choices.
Right.
Very, very different choices, and feel just as great. Because some of that toxicity feels good at times.
Right.
You know what I mean? Those highs and lows feel good. There's adrenaline that's involved in that.
And even when it's real, real bad, as soon as the bad is over, that relief feels good.
Temporarily.
You're like, oh, I fixed it.
Temporarily, right? When you walk away from something that you've created a pattern from, and now you interrupt that pattern, your brain is going to freak out.
Yeah.
The relationship is not the problem. I remember with my ex-husband, when I was over him and I was done with that relationship, and no disrespect to him. I mean, I'm not holding him hostage to who we were when we were younger, but it was a very bad relationship at that time. But when I ended that relationship, I was over him, the human being, the ego, the idea of who he was and whatever. He was the poster boy. As good looking as he was a poster boy for pain. I was over that. What I didn't realize was that the residual emotional effects of the different emotional things that I would feel, my body was in shock of not getting those releases. So I found myself getting involved in a relationship that would reignite those emotional patterns for me because I was unaware. And so what I realized is that when you interrupt patterns, you almost have to go through a withdrawal.
Yeah.
You have to force yourself to be comfortable being uncomfortable for a little while.
Right.
Otherwise, you'll just go back into patterns. And this also includes my work. And one of the things that I realized on this journey that I was on was habitual patterns with the choices and the occupations I was choosing for my life. I've been the forever caregiver, and I didn't realize how that was making me choose certain careers and wondering, why am I so unfulfilled here? But again, it was fulfilling some familiar emotional things that were happening even in my career choices. And I've said this many, many times, the result of that was becoming very successful, being mediocre. Because I didn't really believe in myself enough to do the things that I know that I'm called to do in my life. And so I just became very successful doing the things that were just familiar, easy, successful. They look pretty on the outside. I could buy the shiny objects with it.
Yeah.
But I was very unhappy.
Yeah. Your caption said that today.
Did it?
In the Instagram post. You were talking about how for so long that you bought the shiny objects.
I bought the shiny objects.
And
those were my little wins, right?
Yeah.
And listen, I have a beautiful car, okay? I like beautiful things. I'm not going to sit here, if someone saw me driving down the street, said, I thought she didn't like the shiny objects.
Yeah.
I like beautiful things, but they're not as much as a priority for me. And I'm not, and the intention is why I have them are for different reasons. I don't want the beautiful car because I want to impress people, although I don't mind that people are impressed by it. I do like the machine. I think it's beautiful. I think it's art. I appreciate that. And I do like that I can afford it.
Yeah.
But if you were to take it from me and tell me that I'm going to have to catch the bus for the rest of my life, that's fine as long as I can travel and be somewhere else.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So just my priorities have changed a little bit.
So what I was thinking as you were talking, when you were talking about just like the familiar pattern and, replacing, this, person who gave you this feeling with just another almost version of that person, right? Was the awareness that you've done that in the past, is that part of because I feel like the 30-day retreat and what you've done is a great way to not fall back into that because of just such a long time of a relationship ending. Did you consciously think that I want to disconnect and do all this so that I don't go back into this pattern that I'm trying to leave right now?
It's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because when you remove yourself from your atmosphere, it's very easy to feel very convinced that you're changed and you're going to go out there and back to life and be a different person. But the reality is your atmosphere is going to be very convincing to go back to your default mechanism. And I thought about that on that journey too. And I said, I could teach people this. I could teach them or give them the tools that I use, but in their own environment. Because I actually think that being intentional in small doses and making changes in small doses while you're navigating your atmosphere and your environment is much more impactful and much more lasting.
Right.
Because it compounds over time. Now, when I came back, I was almost overstimulated by all the noise again. I wanted to get back into work and hit the ground running. And I just remember going to a social event and just being overstimulated by conversation and people and talking. And I was like, whew. And so I had to kind of take a little bit of time just to kind of slowly adjust back in and make sure that I stayed with my new practices, my new little rituals that I had created. I had to be very intentional about making sure that as good as I was feeling, that I didn't interrupt my new patterns.
Right.
Yeah.
So you took a second trip,
Hmm.
like after you came back
Yeah.
for a little while. Was that pre-planned, or was
No.
that because you're like, yo, like I'm not done yet? Like
No,
I need
actually it
more.
wasn't. But again, I'm in a period of my life where I have the privilege, and I know not everybody does,
Mhm.
to just get up and go. Right. I'm not bound to a corporate job any longer. I have my own business, and I manage my finances, I think, pretty well enough where I can just kind of pack up and go sometimes.
Mhm.
But no, I didn't plan it.
Mhm.
But when the opportunity presented itself, a really dear friend of mine said, "Hey, look, this is I know what your journey's been like. I know you've been going through." I had spoken to them, and they have a very beautiful lifestyle, and they said, "This is where we're going to be, and all you got to do is pack a bag, and everything else is taken care of." And I wasn't going to say no to that.
Yeah.
It's Hawaii. I mean, come on. I was staying in this beautiful home. I was, very, very blessed. It's not like something where I'm
Yeah.
like big headed or anything about it. I know how blessed I am that I have friends like that in my life.
Yeah.
And so I was like, it's the end of the year. I'm going to go let it be an extension to a thing, which was good actually, because I kind of allowed myself to kind of do a little bit more reconnection.
Mm.
I spent a lot of time with myself, if you will. I mean, I was with my friends too, but I wanted to get a little bit self time. But no, it wasn't a trip that I had planned.
Okay.
But I'm kind of letting life be a little bit more spontaneous now.
Do you think that it helped you kind of like adjust back to like being back here, right? Because
Mhm.
so the way I'm thinking about it is you had a month-long trip to Spain where you were, you know, not really interacting with a whole lot of people, doing a lot of like inner work,
Yeah.
self work. Then all of a sudden you come back, you're in Vegas, you're back in this environment where it's just like, if you don't live in Vegas, you don't really kind of understand it, but it is loud and it is fast.
Yeah.
And, it's like this, and this. And you're like, whoa, kind of overwhelmed. But then you get this opportunity to go back to a place where
I can be at peace again.
it's also at peace, but it's also
Mhm.
a place where where you are interacting with more other people, where you are communicating more with people that you know and love like that. So it's almost like an off ramp rather than like
Yeah.
just like a drop off.
Well, I'll have to say that's coming to my mind as you say this. And this is selfishly, I will say, and again, I'm intentional about being selfish, right? Not to be mean, but to pour into self first. When I left for my trip, one of the biggest decisions I needed to make, and I'm talking about my 30-day trip, was whether or not I was going to end my relationship after 10 years. It was getting rocky. It had been I had a really significant head injury in October the year before. So my trip also was the 1-year anniversary of that head injury. And the injury was so significant that it almost cost me my life. And it was probably it was the most excruciating experience I've ever been through as far as pain. Long story short, the relationship kind of dissolved after that incident happened because of a lot of different things. And we'll have to talk about it another time. But 6 months prior to the trip, I was like, I can't see year 11 with this person. After everything we've been through, I just can't see it. And it's not because he's a bad person or that I don't love him tremendously or that I don't think he loves me. I just can't see the 11th year. The relationship to me wasn't growing anymore. So when I went, I was also intentional about that. I was intentional about my coaching, blah, blah, blah. When I came back, I knew I was crystal clear that it was over, and not like the times before. It was over. And so I needed to move. I literally 3 days later found an apartment, packed up from my beautiful home, and I moved out.
Okay.
The following week was Thanksgiving, and that dreaded idea of like, I know he's alone without family, and we normally do this holiday together, and it took a lot for me not to extend an invitation for him. But I said, I'm not going to do it because I'm going to celebrate my win for myself, and this will just be a setback for both of us.
Right.
So I didn't. So when the opportunity came to go to Hawaii, I said, I need to go on this vacation to see if I miss him. That was kind of a thing that I needed to see. And when I went, normally that would be a vacation because we did a lot of adventures together. Normally that would have been a vacation where I really want him to be there. And no disrespect at all. but I felt at peace without him.
Yeah.
And I needed that.
So did you make the decision that it was going to be done while you were gone? That trip was part of figuring out which way to go.
There were a few decisions I needed to make. One had to do with myself, as far as my health and things like that. Number two was work, what my real purpose was and what I really want to be coaching on, because I would kind of been all over the place because of viral videos and things like that. I just get a lot of different type of clients. And I was like, I don't know if this is really in alignment with me. So I need to get clarity on that. And number three was, I know I'm feeling this way about this relationship, but we go through these patterns, he and I, this cat and mouse that we would do where we patternistically would make up, break up. So I needed to get clear it wasn't one of those patterns again, that it truly was something that was inside of me, that was deep and that was real. But I had to really get clear on who I was and where I'm at in my life and whether or not that relationship really was going to be able to grow, because it to me, it had stopped growing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it just was clarity.
It was just clarity.
In so many different ways.
In so many ways. Like I literally came back crystal clear.
On business as well.
On every reason why I went, I was intentional about getting the answer. And when I left after those 30 days, I was clear.
That answers my next question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it worked.
It really worked. And it was powerful. Yeah. It was very hard though. It wasn't like I think people think I went. It was just paradise.
Yeah.
It was the most emotionally draining, liberating, exhilarating, scariest thing I'd ever done.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, just when you were telling me about just like being quiet with yourself for 30 minutes,
or a day,
I can't do that. Like, I don't want to say can't, but like, I understand, like, because when someone just hears that, they're like, oh, like they don't realize how difficult that is. And to do that intentionally every day it's not hard like running a marathon hard, but it's like much harder in a different
marathon,
setting.
I'll tell you that.
Yeah, exactly. Like you have to sit with yourself. And it's so easy to flee that.
Oh, yeah. Well, your mind will just flee anyway.
Yeah.
You'll just, all kinds of stuff comes up. But the intention is listen, be the listener, be the observer of the voice in your head. Just listen to it. Don't object it. Don't tell it to go away. Just listen and see what comes up. And just, hear it out for a second. Yeah. What's all the stuff that's going on? And also, lastly, the thing that I made sure that I did was I was not going to punish myself if I didn't execute this perfectly.
Yeah.
So towards the end, when I was in Spain, there was a horrific flood that happened in Valencia. And it's along the coastline, but it was south of where I was. But a lot of people lost their lives. And then the storm started coming towards where I was, not nearly as bad, but I was scared. And I didn't have time to dig deep on who I was. I'm thinking, oh my God, like what would happen if this happens here?
Yeah.
How am I going to get home? How am I going to communicate? Things that you don't think about, that you take for granted. And then while I was there, my mother, I talked to my son only, and my mother. Those are the only two people I communicated on a regular basis. And there were some things that happened with my mother and I's communication where I started to realize some correlations with other things without judging it this time. And I was like, oh my goodness, the way my mother is acting right now, and I want to be respectful of my mom, I saw it more clear of how that experience and what it ignited in me, because I was so vulnerable. I'm such a stoic, like hardcore, like person that doesn't cry or break down or anything. That's normally my demeanor. But I was so emotionally vulnerable that she was able to get to me different. And I actually at one point had to say to her, I love you, but I have to cut you off. And if there's an emergency, if you need anything, of course I'm going to be there. And I had to do that without feeling guilty if God forbid something happened, because I realized so much, and I had to process that and realize how much the emotional experience I have with my mother was very similar to my relationship. And so that was hard. And so I didn't execute there were days that I didn't want to journal. I didn't want to write anything. I just wanted to sit on the beach, get a beer, and call it a day. And I did that. And I forgave myself. And I was like, you're not going to beat yourself up for not doing this perfectly, but you're going to make up your writing later.
Yeah.
The goal is 30, you have to answer every question. If you miss a day, then you got 2 questions the next day. Yeah. And I gave myself a little bit of grace with that.
That's good.
Yeah.
And that makes it much more like digestible and doable.
Yeah, because you can't, 70 days hard, 40 days hard, 30 days hard. I mean, it's like, okay, but then you start to beat yourself up and that defeats the purpose.
Yeah, it's got to be like a balance of those things too.
But being intentional, right? I can't say, balance, and I talk myself out of it. I'm going to, because then you can not finish the work. I wanted to be as consistent as I possibly could, but I had a couple of days where I was just really off. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like it worked. Everything worked out.
I'm feeling really, really, really good. Yeah. I'm almost like overly emotional. I feel like I came back softer, more feminine and I feel like I've been longing for her.
Yeah, it's okay to do.
Yeah. So I feel very vulnerable right now. I feel a little bit emotional, but I'm kind of embracing that a little bit, because I want to be in love again. I want to be married one day, but I want who she is to attract something different. Yeah. Respectfully to the person I was with, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So what's next?
Well, this journey did give me I felt like I got downloaded on exactly the coaching that I want to do. I got very clear on that and I started writing out my programs. Mm-hmm. So I'm very, very, very excited. I was blessed to get an investor with my company. So that investment is going to help me really put this stuff together. I actually, when I came back, had the questions and stuff I created a workbook. And so I'm getting ready to launch that for very, very small amount of money just to kind of get it going. But for people who want to do the journey. So I have the questions. I'll have it all written out what I did. Mm-hmm. And I have it set up where there's the exercises and things like that for people to try it themselves while they're at home, with something that's not going to be cumbersome or whatever, but I think it's powerful and I want people to experience it.
Like a physical workbook to get.
Huh?
Like a physical
Yeah, where they can just click and download
cool.
it and it's interactive and they can journal and stuff like that. But I have prompts and things to kind of help them stay on task with it. That's awesome. But I want people to experience what I experienced, Yeah. And so I'm like, I have to create a workbook for this. Like I want other people to feel as enlightened as I do right now. Yeah. So
that's amazing.
Yeah. So 2025, man, I'm ready.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. When's it gonna be available?
My podcast is changing. I have workshops coming. I've been reading a lot and studying a lot, so I can be very. I take a lot of pride and I feel that there is a need. I'm a coach. I'm not an amateur therapist, so I want to make sure that I'm responsible in coaching. And I want to make sure that if I'm going to do this program, that I do it justice and make sure that people actually get the outcome that I really want them to have, and that they want for themselves as well.
Awesome.
Clarity is your power, man.
I love it. Cool. Well, we've already done a whole hour. I feel like we
just
sat down. Yeah.
I know. I'm like, gosh, I hope oh, you're right. It has been an hour. Yeah.
So thank you so much.
I have not shared with anyone yet. A matter of fact, I said, when I come back to the studio to do my show, that's how I want to start it. But I haven't shared this with anyone. So I appreciate.
Yeah. Thank you so much for doing it here.
With you. Yeah.
That is super awesome. And I mean, I'm honored that you did it here.
No,
I didn't even think about that whenever
No, you asked and I was like, you know what? I'm trusting the timing and I'm like, I'm so glad he asked and absolutely it's an honor to be here. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Wow, this one was really good.
You think so?
Yeah.
I hope so. I hope your audience likes it if they were asking you.
Oh, I already know.
Hopefully they will.
As soon as they know that you're going to be on it, then I'm already going to get messages about it.
Good. I just say to your audience out there, anybody who feels like disconnected with self, you don't have to go away, to a foreign country to do it, but do it for you. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like people should definitely honor themselves and do something, at least one little thing for themselves every day that they can be proud of.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks again for being here. And I'm super looking forward to the new look of the podcast, everything that you've got going on coming in 2025. It's going to be a big and great year for you.
Thank you.
And hopefully all of us.
Oh, absolutely.
Awesome.
All right.
Guys, thank you so much for being here. I hope you really enjoyed this. I know you did. I know that you will. Continue to interact with us, like, subscribe, share this if you like it. So that means share it because I know you liked it. And we'll see you next week.